The gates were never meant to open for someone like her. They parted anyway, not because she belonged there, but because chaos sometimes moves faster than protocol. One moment, Adrian Moretti's estate stood sealed in its usual precision of steel and silence. The next, a trembling young woman slipped past the outer checkpoint while two armed guards argued over a delivery manifest. No one noticed her at first. No one except the man seated at the head of the long black table inside. Liana Vale had spent her life being overlooked. Poverty had trained her to move quietly, to occupy as little space as possible. But there was nothing quiet about the room she had just entered. Polished marble floors. Men in tailored suits. Weapons resting openly against expensive wood. And at the center, Adrian Moretti. He did not raise his voice. He did not rise from his chair. He simply looked at her once, and then looked away. Dismissed. In his world, tears were strategy. Desperation was theater. People cried in front of him when they wanted something. She was no different. Or so he thought. Her breathing was uneven. Her hands trembled, but not from fear alone. There was something steadier beneath it. Something that did not match the fragility of her appearance. A guard stepped forward to remove her. Adrian lifted a single finger. The guard stopped. The room quieted, but not completely. Conversations softened into murmurs. Chairs creaked. The faint clink of a glass echoed against stone. Liana swallowed. She had imagined this moment differently. In her mind he would roar, threaten, prove the rumors true. Instead, he ignored her tears entirely. That unsettled her more than cruelty would have. Because indifference meant she had seconds, not sympathy. Adrian's voice came at last, calm and distant. Say what you came to say. It was not permission. It was a countdown. Around her, powerful men watched with thinly veiled irritation. She was interrupting numbers, territories, shipments. She was nothing but disruption. But Liana was not there to beg. She was there because her brother's life was already measured in hours. And because the order that destroyed her father carried Adrian Moretti's name. She stepped forward. You signed the execution. The words did not echo. They landed. For the first time, Adrian did not look past her. He looked at her. Really looked. The shift was almost invisible. A tightening of his jaw, a pause too deliberate to be accidental. Across the table, one man's fingers stilled against his glass. Another avoided eye contact. Liana felt it then. The subtle change in air pressure. The way silence thickened when truth entered a room uninvited. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Why are you really here? That question carried weight. Not curiosity. Warning. Her answer would either end her life, or change his empire. She could retreat. Blame grief. Apologize for the accusation and walk out alive. Or she could finish what she came to do. Expose the betrayal. Reveal that someone inside his organization had been using his authority to erase families who refused to cooperate. Her voice steadied. My father saved you once, she said. And your men killed him anyway. A stillness fell, not confusion. Recognition. Somewhere at that table, a man stopped breathing normally. Because if what she was saying was true, then someone had forged the signature of the most dangerous man in the city. And in Adrian Moretti's world, betrayal was not punished quietly. It was erased publicly. Liana had walked in as a desperate girl. But in that moment, as Adrian rose slowly from his chair, she was no longer invisible. She was the spark in a room full of gasoline. And the underworld had just felt the match strike. Adrian Moretti did not stand quickly. He stood with intention. The chair moved back in a slow, deliberate glide across marble, the sound restrained but unmistakable. Around the table, men who controlled ports, politicians, and entire districts straightened instinctively. No one spoke. No one dared to misread the shift. Liana felt it in her chest, the gravity of his full attention. Two guards adjusted their stance near the doors. Hands hovered closer to concealed weapons. A third stepped behind her, close enough that she could sense the warning in his breath. This room was not built for emotion. It was built for decisions. And decisions here did not require repetition. Adrian descended the single step separating the raised head of the table from the rest of the room. Not rushed, not angry, just controlled. The kind of control that frightened men more than shouting ever could. "You signed the execution," she repeated, her voice thinner now but refusing to collapse. A murmur rippled through the room. Subtle, sharp. Execution. It was a word reserved for traitors, not civilians. Adrian stopped a few feet in front of her. Close enough that she could see how composed he truly was. No visible irritation. No theatrical rage. Only calculation. "You walked through my gates," he said quietly, "to accuse me of killing your father." It was not a question. Behind him, Marco Varelli shifted in his seat. Just slightly. A movement small enough to ignore. But Adrian did not ignore small things. Liana felt the weight of every eye in the room pressing against her skin. The guards were no longer pretending neutrality. One had fully drawn his weapon, angled toward the floor but ready. She could still retreat. She could blame grief. Say she was confused. But her brother's face flashed through her mind. Bruised, terrified, dragged into a van by men who spoke Adrian's name like law. "He refused to move weapons through our neighborhood," she said, forcing the words past the dryness in her throat. 3 days later, men with your crest on their jackets came to our door. Silence deepened. Adrian's expression did not change, but something behind it did. "Our organization does not force shipments into residential zones," he said evenly. "It did," she replied. "And the order carried your signature." There it was. The first fracture. Several men at the table avoided eye contact. One cleared his throat unnecessarily. Marco's jaw tightened, though he masked it with a slow sip of water. Adrian noticed everything. He stepped closer, not threatening but deliberate enough that Liana's breath caught. "Bring me the proof," he said softly. Sounded merciful. It wasn't. Because if she had no proof, she would not leave this estate alive. And if she did, someone at this table wouldn't. No one moved. The air itself seemed suspended between them, stretched thin by implication. Liana felt the danger in Adrian's last words, but she also sensed something else beneath them. Not doubt, not yet, but attention sharpened into something precise. "Bring me the proof." She swallowed. "If I had proof," she said carefully, "I wouldn't have needed to come here." A guard behind her shifted, impatient. Adrian lifted his hand slightly. The movement was minimal but it carried command. The room stilled again. He studied her the way a man studies a document he suspects has been forged. Not for what is obvious, but for what does not fit. "You walked into a room full of armed men," he said, voice level. "You interrupted a meeting that decides what survives in this city. And you came with nothing." His gaze hardened not with anger, but with assessment. "So I'll ask you once." The pause stretched, deliberate and heavy. "Why are you really here?" The question moved through the room like a blade. Not what happened. Not who sent you. Oui. Her first accusation had challenged his authority. This question challenged her motive. Liana felt her composure begin to splinter. Not because she feared death, that fear had already settled into something steady, but because this was the moment that would decide whether he dismissed her entirely. She had prepared herself to accuse him. She had not prepared herself to be understood. "My brother," she said, and her voice faltered despite her effort. "They took my brother." A flicker, subtle but real, passed through Adrian's eyes. "Who?" "Men using your name." The words trembled, but they did not retreat. "They said the debt transferred after my father died. That we owed for what he refused to do. They gave us 72 hours. Her breath thinned. "There are 6 left." The room shifted again, this time not with irritation but with calculation. Adrian did not look at her immediately. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward the table behind him. "Is there a standing order against that family?" he asked without raising his voice. No one answered at once. Marco was the first to speak. Not that I'm aware of. It was smooth. Too smooth. Adrian's eyes returned to Liana. Describe them. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling every detail. The crest stitched into black fabric. The specific phrasing they used. The vehicle without license plates. The warehouse district name she overheard when they thought she wasn't listening. As she spoke, something invisible began to tighten around the room. Because the details were precise. Too precise to be fabricated in panic. When she finished, silence fell again, but it was different now. Heavier. Directed. Adrian stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only those nearest could hear. If someone is collecting debts in my name without my authorization, he said quietly, that is not your problem. His gaze sharpened. It is mine. For the first time since she entered the estate, Liana felt something shift beneath her fear. Not safety. Not yet. But recognition. And across the table, Marco Virelli no longer looked comfortable. Adrian did not return to his seat. He remained standing in front of her, close enough that the distance between accusation and consequence felt razor-thin. Your father's name, he said. It was not gentle. It was procedural. Daniel Vale, she answered. A faint reaction, not from Adrian but from somewhere along the table. Chair shifted. Breath paused too long. Liana noticed. My father owned a small transport yard near the East District, she continued, her voice steadier now. Nothing large. Just trucks. Local contracts. He kept to himself. Adrian's expression did not change, but his silence invited continuation. 3 years ago, someone approached him. They wanted access to his routes. Night shipments. Unregistered cargo. Her jaw tightened. He refused. A subtle murmur rippled across the polished room. Refusal was not common currency in their world. He said weapons didn't belong near schools, she added quietly. He said some lines shouldn't be crossed. The words lingered in the air like an accusation of their own. Adrian's gaze remained fixed on her, but his mind was elsewhere now, measuring timelines, territories, lieutenants assigned to that district. And then, he prompted. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides as if she could still feel its weight. It carried your crest, your signature, an authorization order declaring him non-compliant. Marked for removal. The room tightened. Marked for removal. Not a phrase used lightly. Adrian's jaw hardened almost imperceptibly. I do not authorize removals over transport refusals, he said calmly. I know, she replied before she could stop herself. The boldness surprised even her. His eyes narrowed, not in anger but in interest. You know. My father believed you weren't reckless, she said. He said men like you survive because you're careful. Because you don't create unnecessary enemies. A faint shift passed across Adrian's face. Something unreadable but not dismissive. They came at night, she continued. 4 men. Black jackets. Your crest stitched in silver. Her voice lowered. They didn't argue. They didn't negotiate. They carried the order. Her throat tightened but she did not break. They said the signature made it lawful. Silence settled heavily across the table. Lawful. In their world that word meant sanctioned. Proved. Final. Adrian turned slowly toward his men. Who handled East District transport 3 years ago? He asked. Marco answered again almost immediately. I oversaw it, but local captains managed enforcement. Too immediate. Adrian's gaze lingered on him a fraction longer than necessary. Liana felt it, the thin fracture widening. My father kept the envelope, she said. He believed if he showed you, you'd correct it. But he never got the chance. The implication hovered between them. If the order was real, Adrian had executed a man who respected him. If it was forged, someone inside his empire had used his name as a weapon. And in this room, where loyalty was currency and betrayal was terminal, that possibility weighed more than her accusation ever could. The silence did not break. Thickened. Adrian extended his hand toward her, palm open. "The envelope," he said. Liana hesitated only a second before reaching into the inside lining of her worn coat. She had stitched the pocket herself, reinforced it twice. The paper had traveled with her through rain, through fear, through 3 years of unanswered grief. She placed it in his hand. The crest was unmistakable, embossed in silver. Paper heavy. Official. Adrian unfolded it without haste. Around the table, men leaned back slightly, as though distance might protect them from whatever the page contained. Marco did not move at all. Adrian's eyes moved across the lines once. Then again. The room was so quiet Liana could hear the faint slide of paper against his fingers. At first, his expression did not change. But those who knew him understood the shift was not in his face. It was in his stillness. Too still. He traced the signature at the bottom with his thumb. Adrian Moretti. Perfectly formed. Except it wasn't. A detail almost invisible to anyone else. The final stroke of his surname curved slightly upward instead of cutting clean across. Small deviation. A difference measured in instinct more than sight. He folded the letter once. Carefully. "When was this delivered?" he asked. 3 days before they came," Liana answered. Adrian looked up. "I did not write this." It was not defensive. It was definitive. A faint ripple of discomfort moved through the table. One captain shifted in his seat. Another stared at the document as if it might rearrange itself into innocence. Marco's expression remained composed. "Signatures can be replicated," he said smoothly. "If someone wanted to provoke internal distrust." "This paper came from our internal stock," Adrian interrupted quietly. That ended the room. Because that detail meant access. Not an outsider. Not a rival family. Someone inside. Adrian walked back toward the head of the table, the letter still in his hand. He did not sit. He placed the paper down in front of him and rested both palms against the polished surface. No raised voice. No slammed fist. But something darker than anger began to settle in his posture. "If an order was issued in my name without my authorization," he said evenly, "then someone believed they could act as me." His gaze lifted slowly, sweeping across every man present. "That belief," he continued, "is more dangerous than any refusal." No one spoke, because they all understood what he was saying. Forgery was not merely fraud. It was ambition. And ambition inside a criminal empire was lethal. Adrian picked up the letter once more, studying the forged signature with quiet precision. Liana watched the realization settle. Not shock, not outrage. Betrayal. And unlike her tears, Adrian Moretti did not ignore betrayal. He absorbed it, calculated it, and prepared to remove it. No one rushed to defend themselves. That, more than anything, interested Adrian. In rooms like this, innocence was usually loud. Men protested quickly, distanced themselves aggressively, filled silence with outrage. But here, restraint lingered too evenly across the table. Especially at Marco's end. Marco Varelli leaned back in his chair with practiced ease, one ankle resting over the opposite knee. His expression carried the appropriate amount of concern. Not too much, not too little. Measured. "It's possible," Marco said smoothly, "that a regional captain overstepped. 3 years ago we were expanding east. Oversight wasn't as centralized. Reasonable. Almost helpful." Adrian did not look at him immediately. He continued examining the letter as though it still held secrets. But his awareness had shifted entirely. Marco had answered too quickly in the last 2 exchanges. He had offered explanations before being asked for them. And he had not once asked to see the document up close. "That district reported strong compliance," Marco added. "If there was resistance, I would have known." Would have known. Not did know. Subtle. Adrian finally lifted his gaze. "And yet," he said quietly, "you did not." The words were neither accusation nor absolution. They were an observation placed carefully between them. Marco's smile did not falter. "If someone forged your authority, we should identify them immediately." Adrian noted that as well. Across the table, a captain cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should summon the East District records," he suggested cautiously. "Yes," Adrian replied. But his eyes remained on Marco. "Summon them," he repeated, this time directing the order specifically to him. Fractional pause. Almost imperceptible. Marco inclined his head. "Of course." He reached for his phone, movement steady. Too steady. His thumb hovered over the screen a second longer than necessary before dialing. Liana watched the exchange without fully understanding it, but she felt it, the invisible thread tightening. Adrian stepped away from the table, moving toward the tall windows that overlooked the estate grounds. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Composed, unreadable. "While we wait," he said without turning around, "we will verify something else." The room stilled again. He turned slowly. 3 years ago, who approved the internal crest redesign? Strange question. Several men exchanged glances. Marco answered. "I supervised the rollout." Adrian nodded once. "The stitching on enforcement jackets changed 6 months after that," he said evenly. "The silver thread was replaced with charcoal." He let the details settle. Liana's breath caught. "Your father described silver stitching," Adrian continued, eyes now locked on Marco. 3 years ago. The trap did not spring loudly. It tightened quietly. Because only someone using outdated stock or preserving it intentionally would have access to that earlier design. Marco's composure held. But for the first time, a thin line of tension appeared along his jaw. And Adrian, who missed nothing, saw it. He did not accuse. He did not confront. He simply said, "Call the warehouse." Personally. The room understood what that meant. This was no longer about a grieving daughter. It was about narrowing the circle. And Marco had just stepped closer to the center. Marco made the call. He put it on speaker. His voice carried the same steady authority it always had, issuing a routine request for archived inventory logs from 3 years prior. No tremor. No hesitation. If there was fear beneath it, it did not surface. Adrian listened without looking at him. When the call ended, he turned to the far end of the table. "Pull financial records for East District transport during that period," he said. "Every transfer. Every rerouted shipment." Quietly. Phones appeared in measured hands. Messages were sent in coded phrases that sounded harmless to outsiders. Within minutes, replies began to arrive. Numbers. Warehouse identifiers. The room transformed from accusation to audit. Liana stood where she was, forgotten for the moment, yet more central than anyone else present. She watched men who controlled entire sectors of the city lower their eyes to glowing screens, their authority momentarily reduced to data. Adrian walked back to the table as updates filtered in. He did not sit. "What do we have?" he asked. One of the captains cleared his throat. Several shipments logged as agricultural equipment were rerouted east during that quarter. "Authorized by?" Adrian asked. "Was Lieutenant's office." Silence. Marco did not react outwardly. "That was expansion phase," he said calmly. "We used alternate labeling to avoid customs interference." Reasonable. Again. Another phone vibrated. The same captain glanced down, then looked up more slowly this time. "There are discrepancies in warehouse storage fees," he said. "Facilities we no longer use were active longer than reported." "Which facilities?" Adrian asked. The name of a warehouse district echoed across the room. Liana's stomach tightened. "That's where they took my brother," she said before she could stop herself. Every head turned toward her. Adrian did not. He was already looking at Marco. Marco exhaled through his nose, controlled irritation. That warehouse was decommissioned 2 years ago. On paper, Adrian replied softly. Another message arrived. This time, the captain's voice carried something new. Uncertainty. Satellite logs show intermittent activity at that location over the past month. Intermittent. Unregistered. Unreported. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Not with explosive anger but with precision aligning into certainty. Who holds access codes, he asked. Marco answered as expected. My office and enforcement captains. Adrian nodded once. Send no warning, he said quietly. No alerts. No internal notice. His eyes lifted, sweeping across the room. We will visit the warehouse ourselves. The words were calm. But beneath them lay something colder than fury. Because unauthorized shipments were manageable. Forged signatures were punishable. But hidden operations inside his own territory, active and concealed, were treason. And Adrian Moretti did not tolerate treason. Across the table, Marco's composure remained intact. Yet the faintest pulse beat at his temple. And Adrian saw that too. The convoy moved without sirens. 3 black vehicles slipped through the city's late-night traffic with disciplined silence, headlights cutting clean lines through the dark. No announcements, no advance warning, just presence. Liana sat in the back seat of the second car, hands clenched in her lap. No one had asked her to come. No one had told her to stay behind. Adrian had simply opened the rear door himself and said, "Get in." The warehouse district rose ahead like a forgotten skeleton of industry. Concrete, rusted shutters, long shadows cast by broken streetlights. The building she recognized stood near the end of the row, its exterior lifeless. But not abandoned. She felt it. The vehicles stopped. Men stepped out first, weapons low but ready. Adrian exited last, adjusting his cuffs as though arriving at a formal appointment instead of a potential ambush. The front gate was locked. Marco approached the keypad without being asked. Old access code, he said calmly, entering numbers. The gate clicked open. Too easily. Adrian watched him, expression unreadable. Inside, the air smelled of metal and damp concrete. A single overhead light flickered somewhere deeper in the structure. Footsteps echoed, controlled, deliberate. Sound. Muted. Not machinery. Not wind. Human sound. Liana's breath stopped. There, she whispered. One of Adrian's men moved ahead, pushing open a side door. The beam of a flashlight cut across stacked crates, and then caught movement. A figure tied to a metal chair. Bruised. Alive. Liana did not remember crossing the distance. She was suddenly kneeling in front of her brother, fingers trembling as they brushed his face. I'm here, she whispered. I'm here. His eyes fluttered open. Relief broke through the swelling. They said. His voice cracked. They said you wouldn't come. Adrian stood a few feet away, taking in the scene with a stillness that had grown more dangerous than any raised voice. The ropes were professional. Not reckless. Not improvised. This was not a desperate kidnapping. It was structured. Intentional. Leverage. One of the men stepped forward. No guards, he reported. No perimeter lookouts. Which meant whoever ran this operation had confidence. Or warning. Adrian's gaze shifted slowly toward Marco. Marco met it without flinching. If this was hidden from us, someone panicked when they realized we were coming. Adrian did not respond immediately. Instead, he crouched near the chair, examining the bindings himself. His fingers brushed a stamped marking on one of the restraints, a supplier code. He stood. Check the back offices, he ordered quietly. 2 men moved at once. Seconds stretched. Then a voice echoed from deeper inside. Sir. There are files. Adrian walked toward the sound, each step measured. Inside a small office sat a desk, a laptop still warm, and a stack of printed authorization sheets bearing his forged signature. Fresh ink. Recent dates. Not 3 years ago. Liana felt the shift before he spoke. This was no longer about a past mistake. This was ongoing, active. And someone had used her brother not just to collect a debt, but to flush out how much she knew. Urgency didn't spike with noise. It tightened silently. Because if the operation was still active, then the architect was still close. They did not return to the estate. Adrian made the call from inside the warehouse office. His voice low and controlled. Within 20 minutes, cars began arriving. Not with flashing lights, not with chaos, but with quiet obedience. Enforcers. Men who understood that when they were summoned without explanation, something fundamental had shifted. Liana stood beside her brother, who was now wrapped in one of Adrian's jackets. She felt the atmosphere change as more figures entered the warehouse floor, forming a loose half-circle under the harsh industrial lights. No one spoke above a murmur. Marco stood a few steps to Adrian's right, posture straight, expression carefully neutral. On the metal table in the center of the floor, Adrian placed the forged authorization sheets. 3 years ago, he began evenly, a man was executed under my name. The room stilled. Tonight, a boy was held under my name. His gaze moved slowly across the assembled men. And neither order came from me. Silence deepened into something absolute. Adrian picked up one of the papers and held it up just enough for those closest to see. My signature, he said. My crest. My authority. He let the sheet fall back onto the table. Forgery is theft, he continued calmly. But impersonation within this organization is treason. The word landed harder than any shout. Marco shifted his weight slightly. If someone has manipulated internal stock and access codes, they've been careful, he said. We should conduct a full audit before drawing conclusions. Adrian turned his head slowly toward him. We already did. A faint flicker crossed Marco's face. Too fast for most to notice. Not fear. Calculation. Adrian stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough that everyone leaned in to hear. The warehouse remained active under a restricted access code, he said. A code held by 2 offices. He paused. Mine. The air seemed to thin. And yours. The silence that followed was not confusion. It was recognition. Marco did not immediately deny it. That, more than anything, confirmed it. Instead, he exhaled slowly. Expansion requires difficult decisions, he said. You built this empire on strength. I ensured it stayed profitable. You built a shadow inside my name, Adrian replied. A muscle moved in Marco's jaw. The East District would have resisted openly. Fear is efficient. And forging my authority? Adrian asked quietly. Marco's composure fractured. Not loudly but undeniably. You were becoming cautious, he said. Sentimental. Lines about schools and neighborhoods. His voice sharpened. This city respects power, not restraint. There it was. Not apology. Justification. The warehouse fell utterly silent. Men who had served under Marco for years now stood motionless, understanding that allegiance had just shifted. Adrian did not raise his weapon. He did not need to. Power, he said softly, without loyalty is decay. He stepped back slightly. 2 enforcers moved forward. Marco did not fight. He held Adrian's gaze until the last second, defiance giving way to inevitability. The sound that followed was brief, contained, final. When it was over, no one moved. Because in that warehouse, under cold lights and colder judgment, the underworld had just been reminded. Adrian Moretti did not ignore betrayal. And when he spoke, the entire empire listened in silence. By morning, the warehouse had been emptied. Not erased. Adrian did not erase lessons, but stripped of its shadow. The false ledgers were collected. The forged seals burned. The men who had answered to Marco stood in a line at the estate courtyard, waiting for their futures to be decided. Liana sat beside her brother on the stone steps near the fountain. A doctor had come and gone. The bruises would fade. The fear would take longer. Adrian stood before his captains. There was no dramatic speech. Only correction. East District operations are suspended, he said evenly. All enforcement restructuring will report directly to me for the next quarter. No secondary authorizations. No delegated signatures. His gaze moved across the assembled men, not searching for rebellion, but setting a new tone. Community zones are off limits, he added. Transport disputes are negotiation, not punishment. A few exchanged glances. Not disagreement. Adjustment. Marco's absence was understood without mention. His authority dissolved overnight. Those who had benefited from his shadow deals were reassigned, demoted or quietly removed. Power did not weaken. It refined. When the captains dispersed, Adrian remained in the courtyard. This state felt different, not softer but clearer. Liana approached, her brother's hand wrapped around hers. You didn't have to bring him here, she said quietly. Yes, Adrian replied. I did. He studied the boy briefly, assessing not unkindly. You're safe now. The words were simple. They carried weight. Liana met his gaze. The fear that had driven her into his gates had shifted into something steadier. You could have ignored me, she said. I did, he answered honestly. At first. A faint acknowledgement passed between them. In my world, he continued, emotion is often a weapon. I assumed yours was. And now I know it was truth. The courtyard breeze moved lightly through the trees. For the first time since she had stepped inside these walls, Liana felt no urge to brace herself. What happens to us? She asked. Adrian considered the question. No debt stands against your family, he said. Your father's name will be cleared in every ledger that carries it. Not charity. Restoration. He paused, then added, if anyone uses my crest to threaten your neighborhood again, you contact me directly. It was not protection offered lightly. It was acknowledgement earned. Liana nodded once. She understood what it meant and what it did not. This was not an invitation into his world. It was a line drawn in it. As she turned to leave, her brother steady beside her, Adrian watched her walk through the gates that had once seemed impossible to cross. She had entered as a grieving daughter desperate for mercy. She left as the woman who exposed a fracture inside an empire. And Adrian Moretti, who once ruled with distance alone, understood something new as he looked over his domain. Power was not preserved by fear. It was preserved by precision. And by knowing exactly when to listen.